Looks good.
Thank you, Amy.
Okay, well, it looks like the unassigned participants are getting lower and lower, so we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. We are excited that you have joined our breakout session for emphasizing career and work-based learning. I will be your facilitator. I am Heather Bushelman, and I am from the Kentucky Department of Education. I am the program coordinator for comprehensive school counseling. So just a few reminders before we turn it over to our speakers. We are recording this session, and just for our time's sake, our speakers, I know we're going to go through some slides for a few minutes, and then we are going to open it up for all of you who have joined us for questions, comments, gathering ideas for things you have found that are working, and then of course enhancing anything that you may need to ask questions about based on our topic today. Just with the amount of people we do have in this session, which is amazing, we have this many. If you could put all questions or comments into the chat, that will allow me to be able to see everyone, and I can scroll up and down to ensure I don't miss anything that you would like to comment about or to ask a question about. That's all I have for the beginning of our session. So are you all ready, Gary and David?
Yes.
Okay, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, good morning for those out west. I'll turn it to Dave to start with introductions, and then I'll follow.
Okay. I'll be introducing. I'll be working with Gary in this session, and I'm Dave Wilcox. I haven't met many of you. I got into this field a number of years ago under the National Skills Standards Board. For those that are over 35, you might remember that, which was a serious attempt to start to look at aligning education and career preparation with the demand of industry. And what stemmed from that, of course, was much of what we're experiencing today in terms of certification and leveraging certification as part of a total development strategy. I am currently the CEO of GSX, which you may not have heard of. It's a company that really works on certification development, implementation internationally, as well as for the federal government.
Thank you, Dave. My name is Gary Konarska. I'm the Executive Director and CEO of the American Welding Society. It's a professional and trade association that supports the welding industry both here in the US and around the world. I am also one of the board members of the Coalition for Career Development Center. And so I'm proud to be associated with such a great initiative where we're focusing on making career readiness for all the first priority of America. So what we wanted to discuss today, and Dave and I did prepare just a few talking points, but then we do really want to make this as interactive as possible. Because my feeling is that those that have joined us today probably have a lot to offer to this very important topic. And so we do want to first focus in on the 5 pillars of what the CCD Center basically built as what we call the solutions framework. So the first one of prioritizing career planning. So that pillar, there is a breakout session for that as well. We're happy you didn't join that one. You came to ours, but that's really focused on personalized career and academic plans. You know, and as Heather mentioned, in Kentucky, they call those individual learning plans, but really that's something that's becoming widespread across many of the states, but not yet all of the states. And so we recognize that the earlier that children are exposed to career opportunities, the more likely they are to explore those opportunities later. And while we're primarily focused at the high school level, we do believe that in the elementary level, there can be some introduction, followed by career exploration, followed by even more deeper work-based learning opportunities starting as early as 11th grade. Next is the providing professional career advising. So this is critical. There's many studies showing that the ratio of students to career counselors does have an impact as to the outcomes of career readiness. And so naturally, the more counselors, so lower number of students per counselor, the more of an impact and better outcomes when it comes to career readiness have been achieved in many of the different states. I will skip the emphasizing applied and work-based learning since we'll go into more detail on the next slide. But then we look at providing high-quality career development technology. And this is an area that we as the CCD Center want to provide guidance to industry and to career counselors to be able to offer a high-quality technology to support the development of these TCAPs. And the last is ensuring accountability. Being data-driven in our approach, being more focused on outcomes rather than inputs, looking at things like graduation rates, employment rates after graduation, rather than enrollments. So now let's get into some of the details specific to emphasizing applied and work-based learning. And so these 9 guidelines came from one of our white paper. And we're going to split between Dave and I and take a few of these just to kind of introduce the concepts briefly. So if you looked at the expand work-based learning, the recognize the critical role of the private sector, those really are emphasizing how important it is for that private-public partnership. Just as Michelle was saying in the previous presentation, those partnerships are critical to the enrichment of these programs. And so as the CCD Center, we want to help to provide the guidelines for work-based learning. We look at even the definition of work-based learning. It could be anything from awareness to exploration, to internships, to registered apprenticeships. But we would really like to see paid work-based learning opportunities. We do find these, and you combine that with our barriers to youth, our investing in equitable opportunities. That is an important aspect of what we're promoting, is so that there is the opportunity for students to be able to support themselves, while also thinking through what are some of these challenges. And that'll be something we can talk about in the breakout discussion here in a moment. When we kind of look at, and earlier the term was used, wraparound services. That's something we can't overlook as we develop these programs. Dave was highlighting yesterday, we were in discussion about in a rural area and where some of the industry that is willing and able and wanting to participate in work-based learning programs may be as far as 20 miles away. So then how do we transport the students there if they don't have their own transportation? As Michelle mentioned, things like childcare, as they get closer to graduation, or they may be after graduation, that may be a barrier to entry for these work-based learning programs. So I'll turn it over to Dave to talk about some of the quality utility and some of the other points related to the guidelines.
Right, I'll address the question about the quality work-based learning. I think it ties then directly to the point that Gary is making, is that quality is defined by the outcomes rather than the inputs. In other words, the intentionality and the expectation of learning would be a very, very critical piece of defining quality and how you implement it. I've been looking at some of the state guidelines, various states. I'm currently living in Virginia, so I looked at theirs first, and you can certainly see that there's a recognition that there are different contexts. Schools exist in different contexts, from very urban settings to very rural settings, and how you might define quality would be contextualized here in terms of what's the expectation and possibility. But there needs to be an effort to really define that clearly and to have some evidence that those outcomes, in fact, are verified in terms of learning outcomes. Do you want me to move on to the other ones you want me to cover, Gary, or like that was looking at that point. Number 4, one is the quality and utility of industry certifications that I will be talking a little bit about also a little bit longer and a little bit of while is that there are something like 6,000 to 7,000 industry certifications in the country, and they keep expanding. The question is, how do you make selections as to what are the appropriate? Certainly, there's the questions about what the current economic context is that you, in fact, that you are preparing people for. And today, people don't have to work where they live, so that creates another variable in selecting the appropriate certifications you want to address or focus on or leverage in some fashion. But even in that situation, there's a question: when do you know that this is something that the student will benefit from, experience value from being able to make that statement and help guide the learning processes as well? The other is encouraging students, making a case. There's still a lot of confusion in many areas, and I see this in industry and I see this in education, distinctions between different forms of credentials. One of the confusing terms is the one certificate, a certificate program which a post-secondary institution might, or an education might develop, versus an industry certification. And they get used synonymously sometimes, and they both have value, but they are different. There is a case to be made that industry certifications have a unique set of characteristics that make them very valuable. One is their industry, that the data that drives the design of the certification, the data that drives the measurement strategies being used to assure learning outcomes, they were derived really from industry engagement as opposed to being internally developed. And we'll talk more about some of the quality criteria, which is saying that industry certifications means industry, not just locality. You might have some of those industries in your region or your area, but we'll talk about one of the quality criteria is that represents needs and requirements and expectations across an industry sector, and that would be a characteristic of a certification more likely than it would be what we call a certificate program, even though they have more ultimate value as well. Those are some of the points I want to make here. The one of the CCD asked me to chair a task, which was to start to look at a set of guidelines for national industry certifications. And we assembled about 25 national experts, including Gary, and from many different sectors, not only from the manufacturing, construction, IT, healthcare, service related, and they represent many forms and types of certification. They represent both role-based certification, foundational certifications, which might be like MSSC, or very specific and narrow, what we call skill-based certification. So many forms and types, and from many sectors. And the goal was to develop an industry-defined quality assurance set of guidelines. We had quite a bit of a discussion about that, as you might suspect. And but at the conclusion, there was a consensus around some guidelines I'll just share briefly in a moment. And the goal, of course, is to increase the employability and income and wage opportunities for students. It's today that one of the greatest challenges in American industry today is maintaining a constant focus on upskilling their workforce. We haven't. You probably saw the whole movement away from white collar and blue collar these days to a new collar, and starting to look at how we're rethinking the workforce and rethinking preparation for that. And reskilling must be a consistent and continuous process rather than relying on just what you learned at one point in your career. I'll quickly run through those guidelines, Gary, on next page. So it's the design of the certification. It is how you put it together and develop it with the appropriate subject matter experts. And then, of course, delivery standards, access for both students and others. And the I remember the manufacturing when we worked with MSSC on that one a number of years ago. They had 1,600 national companies participated in the validation studies. So it does truly represent both sub-sectors as well as the national identity. Certainly the way you measure the learning and the assessment protocols you use have a number of critical needs. If the certification is going to be used for an employment purpose, it must meet certain legal guidelines, certainly, but must represent an accurate representation of what has been learned by that student. And of course, all of the programs need consistent updating and evidence that there's consistent reflecting on the rapid change of all jobs today. That means that there needs to be consistent focus on change and assurances that that provider does maintain that focus and continues to upgrade, not upgrade so much as to refocus on the changing skill environment. And of course, appropriate and published policies, so they're clear to all. It's transparency, that it's recognized by employers in the target industries that you're focusing on, and they see value, and they often include in their selection and hiring and promotional systems some referral to appropriate certifications. And a critical point is that there be sustainability and long-term viability. That if you have an organization providing a certification without assurances, it'll be around 5 years from now or 10 years. A student might invest quite a bit of their energy, time, and talent in attaining a credential that really loses value over time. So that can't always be guaranteed, but certainly one of the criteria of quality. They're national in scope, and in many cases international in scope, and they are represented where possible by people that represent industries through associations, NAM being one, and others that are supporting their own sector that they represent. So those were I think there's one. This transparency, so everyone knows what it is, what you're learning, what you're measuring, what you're testing, that it fits in and is coordinated, synchronized with education and training, that you are also looking for assuring that that the processes used for that are clear and accessible and easy to understand. And that, of course, that the provider of the certification, the certifying body, attests to the quality through the appropriate documentation. And there are national and international standards regarding that point. And so you'd want to really have evidence of that as well. It's kind of a quick coverage of what there's a consensus focus on what the major priorities are for defining quality of a certification itself.
Thank you, Dave. So as I mentioned, we did not prepare a lot of remarks because we really wanted to have a rich discussion around this topic. Now, when we look at the conditions for career readiness report that was introduced at the beginning of yesterday's summit, there's a wealth of information in there around many of the topics, work-based learning being one of those topics. And one of the things that was stated that I really liked, and it was actually also highlighted yesterday by Ron Busby, the president of the U.S. Black Chamber of Commerce, in the industry panel, was about role models in these professional areas. And then there's the actual, the ability to support a child with the capacity to aspire. And I thought when I read that in the career readiness report, I thought that really resonated with me personally. Because I know I represent the welding industry, which is a skilled trade, formerly a blue collar type of industry in many cases. And if you didn't have anybody in your social circle, whether it's your family friends, where you lived, your opportunity to be exposed to what a career in the welding industry could be is very limited. And so as you look at these opportunities, because not every student is going to go to a 2 or 4 year institution. And while we would aspire that many of them do choose to do that, the facts based on a lot of the data is that they either won't go or they may not finish. And so by getting as early as possible in the education, these opportunities to explore careers is absolutely critical. So I wanted to maybe give, since Heather thought that she was just going to be facilitating today, Now, she does work for the Kentucky Department of Education, right? And so she is focused on the work-based learning programs in Kentucky and supporting their career advisors throughout the state. So I thought we'd have Heather maybe give us a few words and then open it up for conversation.
All right, thank you, Gary. Put me on the spot. Yeah, so in Kentucky, actually right now we are enhancing a lot of what the work-based learning and the career development looks like, all the way from preschool up through 12th grade and into post-secondary. And so a few of the different initiatives, I know the different meetings I get to sit in on and give input, since I know I do help with all the counselors in the state, which includes college and career coaches in the high schools, is our individual learning plan. In Kentucky, they start that at 6th grade, and that focuses on a lot of social emotional learning skills in order to build every year. So by the time they get to high school, every student, based on this ILP, in short, they have an individual graduation pathway. So for example, it's not built anymore statewide of English 1, 2, 3, 4. It's more of, you may take English 1 and 2, and then you get to branch out into other accredited classes that are based on your individual learning plans, goals, and what you essentially want for a career, or even in like a career group, and for some of those ideas. So each student in Kentucky has an option of having a more individualized career and graduation pathway, which leads then to the work-based learning. We have a lot of students, who transfer, and they are they will go to off-campus opportunities. They do go to different businesses. And I know, and I love, Gary, how you all are mentioning inclusiveness and the equity part of this, because I know, for example, in Kentucky, we have a lot of rural areas where we do have students who maybe look to go 20 miles away, but we are able to bring community members to them, or do virtual learning options as well. So especially, due to COVID, you've had to get pretty creative with your virtual options. But we are also making sure we are building up our elementary students, because a lot of them may not hear this until middle school. And so we are building in different types of playbooks. And we already have standards for career, for our counselors, our teachers, any educator to teach to our students, to start learning what skills should you have to be employable. What does that look like when you're 5? What does that look like when you're 16? So we are building that to ensure when our students do graduate, whatever avenue they go down, that they are ready for their careers. We also have a document coming out very soon for CTE that is focused on all the social emotional castle domains. That is a crosswalk between those. And so that's going to come out in Kentucky in about a month, which is very exciting. I know we're working very closely with Castle on that. So yeah, so those are just a few, just kind of a very short and sweet synopsis of some things we have going on here in Kentucky.
Oh, thank you, Heather, for sharing that with us. I mean, I think we're a small enough group here that I would encourage us to come off the microphone and unmute. And if you're really feeling wild and crazy, you can even come on video while you're at it. But one of the things, as I've worked with different members of industry that are very supportive of this, one of the interesting aspects is the scalability of these programs is something that there isn't a magic formula just yet. And there seems to be an imbalance in some areas where the number of students looking to participate in a work-based learning program outstrips the number of employers that are willing to bring on a student for a work-based learning opportunity. And so I'm now talking more specifically to a manufacturing environment, junior, senior type year, where it might be a split time where they're going to the facility to get the exposure, that there's more students that want to do that than what the employers can actually handle in this example. And so I wanted to pose to the group, what are some of the strategies that you're using to engage the employers within the regions around the schools to open up and to have that capacity in order to accommodate as many students that may be interested in work-based learning. If you're trying to speak, you might be on mute. Rachel, thank you.
Well, good morning to all these wonderful colleagues all around the United States. Hi, my name is Rachel Turner Benson, and I'm with Goodwill Industries of the Olympics and Rainier region, and we are a licensed private vocational school. I serve as the Military and Veteran Services Programs Manager, but to answer your question, with the onslaught of COVID, our particular Goodwill, we had for many years, we owe a youth funding and the youth build, which was all focused on construction and kind of the pre-trade opportunities and pathways there, coupled with the students being able to get their GED. We had a lot of high barrier students that were with us. Well, unfortunately, right as COVID happened, the youth build contract, we did not get renewed for it. But what did happen is we had 2 iterations, and we're actually now in maybe kind of even the 3rd iteration. And there was funding, emergency funding that came in, and it placed young people into opportunities where they had student workers during COVID that were helping in the daycare centers, and that were helping with some of the other kind of essential services. We had kids that were in the doctor's offices, and they were learning how to file charts, and so it was different tracks, but it was very meaningful to these students. They were paid, so they were able to get a paid gig out of it. And then this particular iteration, it was more than really just a placement, or a kind of a short-term placement. They actually did what a lot of other work-based learning programs do that we work with adults, is that if the organization that had the student come in at the end of the time, or maybe even during that student's tenure there, the focus was on helping get that young person a job in that industry, or with that employer, or at least a guaranteed interview. And so that's one thing that's been going on out here in Washington State. Folks may remember we were kind of unfortunately the ground zero for COVID. And so we had early impacts and closures with that. So just really excited to always, see things and be of service to our youth, and help them really understand that there are multiple pathways. And so, so that's what we were doing for youth out here in Washington State.
Rachel, thank you so much. I mean, again, when we're looking at the outcome of employability, right? And I think that's ultimately, when we're looking at these programs, is the outcome we're really looking for. And one of the things I think sometimes we also forget is it might give a student what they figure out what they don't want to do, which is just as valuable as what they do want to do. So they can kind of learn in a safer environment where they're now not saddled in at least cases where they're still in high school with potential bills and life and all those things. They can figure out early on, maybe this isn't for me, and that would be. And so, those opportunities to get them employed, hopefully within the industry or even at the employer, obviously would be the greatest. But that's so critical. And thank you so much for sharing.
Oh, sure. And, Gary, as you did say, just one really quick thing. When we do work with our transitioning military, and a lot of them, are young people, they've done a good, 2-year, 4-year contract and that. We do heavily with the work-based learning programs that we do run out on Joint Base Lewis McChord, shadowing, learning about the corporate culture and doing that kind of research it's required before they're placed in any kind of a work-based learning opportunity.
Yeah, that's a great addition to what you were saying. Is there anyone else that would maybe like to share kind of what their experience, some of the hurdles of finding enough private partnerships or employer partnerships for the students?
As this is Dave. I wanted to just add to that question, and maybe is the as Gary referred, we had a conversation yesterday talking about rural. We maybe have one major employer. How do you, and the point that was made that there are more students who might value that work-based learning experience than there are companies willing to engage or develop a program. How do different organizations, how do different states reach out or make awareness, make employers aware of these opportunities?
Hi, Mary, you have your hand up, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So we have a really successful program. We run 2 successful programs, one for high school and one for those that graduate out of high school. And we do go into the rural areas, we go into the high schools, and we're really focused on the CTE programs or any of the STEM programs. And we find that we have better success that way and bringing those young people into these programs, or at least to experience what manufacturing is about. Mm-hmm. And it's worked very well with us because our female population is about maybe 30% of our program, which is really, really good. And I would have to say probably about 75% are POC, people of color, that are in that program as well. So we are touching points where we are moving into the areas where we have economically disadvantaged households, where we're impacting lives that way. And it's very rewarding. And we started the Texas FAME back in 2016. And we waited for my group for their graduation from 2015 to see what the return on investment was. We started off with 5 companies, and we're now 15 companies strong, and we're growing and growing and growing. But this is one way of being able to do that. And we all will take a section of the area because it's a big area. So we're all responsible for meeting with those high schools and going in there, having those face-to-face, and bringing those graduates with us, or the ones in the programs, to help tell their stories is what's really worked for us.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask Mary a question?
Please.
Mary, are you, it says you're with Toyota. Are you part of the Toyota industry in going in and recruiting students to be part of a program, or do you have nothing to do with Toyota?
No, I'm actually, I'm very, very connected to Toyota. I'm connected to the San Antonio plant here. However, when we first started off, it was just strictly Toyota. But when we go out, we're representing Texas FAME for the area. So when we go out and recruit, we're recruiting for all 15 companies, not just our company.
But I think that's kind of one of the probably the big factor in success is that you are the industry side saying, this is important, I'm going to do this. Mm-hmm. And I'm in the life sciences industry, and it's not so common to have work-based learning experiences. I think one of those factors is the safety that people are concerned about, not only for the individual, but if they're making biomanufacturing, the safety of the product as well, and mm-hmm. making sure that is aseptic or whatever you want to call it. So I love that you're sharing this, and I feel like stories like you guys, these success stories of the companies and speaking with their peers, so other manufacturers or any related business, is really important to get those stories out there and then open up other people's minds to it, for one. And then the second thing I think that everybody is really stretched thin today more than ever. It's like every day that goes on, everyone's bandwidth is just less and less. And so to have a really successful program, it's got to be managed by somebody. And I have no statistics to back this up, but it's my guess that probably there have been bad experiences. You know, I've taken in great interns who just take the ball and run with it. And I've had other interns who have required a really structured program with an end goal in mind. So one of the things I'm working on with my companies, I work for a nonprofit in workforce development, is partnering with the right people who know how to do this, who know how to have a really hefty screening program for identifying the right candidates that are the right fit. Those who I'm working toward apprenticeships, who know how to make it a registered apprenticeship and meet all of those qualifications to do that. And so that lessens kind of the bandwidth on my organization's end, because I can partner with those who already know how to do it and do it really well.
That's a good point. I actually put a lot of those structures in place before we got started, so it's actually benefiting the other companies. I'll put my information into the chat if you want to have some more conversation. I'll be more than willing to have more conversation with you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and that right there is the value of something like this, right? Is connecting those, and they're in disparate areas, different parts, maybe, and definitely in different industries. But to hear those stories, those successful stories. And, you know, as Mary was saying, and I had the lucky opportunity to actually moderate a panel where Mary was one of the speakers. And so I got to hear kind of the full story of what they've done there at Toyota in Texas. But, you know, that aspect of it's now extended where they were the pioneers, but now have engaged 14 more employers to all kind of unify. So they've got scale. So that's that scalability I was just mentioning, and they're concentrated in a certain geographical area. And then she also brought up intentionality, right? That was one thing Dave and I were talking about yesterday. If you don't have structure to it and there isn't intentionality to it, those bad experiences are probably going to be the norm. You know, one of the recommendations I read was about having somebody that's an owner of the program, right? There's a dedicated resource, whether that's their full-time role or it's at least they know that they own that work-based learning program. That was a critical factor to success, is that on the public side and on the private side, there was a point of contact that truly owned ensuring that rich experience. And so, I mean, that's one of the areas, as I referred to before, where, you know, as they look to scale, that's also an important aspect, is to reach out around your local regions